Okay, thanks everyone for coming at 8 a.m., day 2. We're glad to have you, especially after such a long hiatus for the live Adobe Summit. So you're joining us for 10 tips to get started with Edge data collection. If you're here for advanced pottery, you're in the wrong place. So that'll have to be later, although Laura has some expertise.
I heard you do too.
Yes.
We'll teach that tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow. Well, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Anyway, my name is Jim Klocko. I'm a managing principal consultant at Adobe. I've been with Adobe for about 8 years. And I lead a team of subject matter experts on Edge data collection, specifically the Web SDK, which is precisely kind of one of the core technologies that we're going to be talking about today. Through my time at Adobe, I've worked for telco companies, financial services, retail, to help them get the most out of their solutions. So, have quite a bit of experience with that. I graduated from the University of Massachusetts, go Minutemen, and I live in Seattle, although I did grow up in the Boston area. I'm married with an 18-year-old son, which I cannot believe that he's 18 years old. And I love the outdoors. So with that, Laura is going to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Laura Carroll. I am also a managing principal consultant at Adobe. I've been there for about 4 years, but I did 8 years before that working client side. I help lead a team of mobile experts on Edge as well as other implementations. And I've worked in retail and healthcare and B2B, but I've worked with financial services, media, across industries since joining Adobe. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to Penn State. Should I mention that?
Go for it. I'm impressed.
I'm also a big fan of the outdoors, especially anything water-related, stand-up paddleboard, kayaking, hiking. And I'm usually taking pictures while I'm out there, although I'm a little bit of a film nerd, so please don't judge me. Anyway, setting some expectations. So this session is mostly about what we've learned over the past however many years in our 20 years of experience joint. It's not going to be a technical deep dive. We're not going to do like step-by-step migration plans. There are some great sessions that will do that this week. If you haven't checked them out, you can view the recordings. But this is like a high-level perspective on the things that we've seen from customers time and time again. So you should leave here with knowing the 10 essential things that you need to know to be successful when moving to Edge data collection. So anybody that's been outdoors, like Jim and I, you should kind of be familiar with the Outdoors 10 Essentials, right? They were created by some gentleman in Seattle, Jim. And they're what you should have with you anytime you go into the outdoors. You may not need them. You may need them all, hopefully not. But since we kind of think of Edge as getting started on a journey as well, we wanted to give you the same sort of 10 essentials. These are the Outdoors 10 Essentials, so we're going to go over what the Edge 10 Essentials are. Before we go too deep into that, though, Jim, can you tell us a little bit about Edge data collection?
Yes. Before we go into our 10, we have to define our terms, right? We want to understand what Edge data collection means. What do we mean when we talk about Edge data collection? So if you're familiar with the current set of Adobe solutions and the way they're implemented, you will have on your web pages, for example, you'll have maybe an app measurement library and a target library, that's at.js. And you may also have visitor API for getting a unique visitor ID. So that's 3 different libraries that you're likely to have on your page. And what the Web SDK does is consolidate those different libraries into one library that can do all of those things, right? It can send data to analytics, and I'll tell you how in just a moment, and it can also retrieve personalization content and get a unique identifier. So it essentially does all the functions of those different libraries, but it does it in a much more compact and performant way. And so if you look at the 3 dots on the left side here, those are just indicators of the main sources of data being sent to the edge. So one is the Web SDK, which I mentioned. This is this JavaScript library. There's also a mobile SDK that can do the same thing, send data to the edge. And there's an Edge API. So create to your heart's content. Anything where you can deploy an API you can send data to the edge. And when you do send data to the edge is a configurable node that you can indicate that what you want to do with that incoming data. So for example, you can send data to Adobe Platform, or you can send data to Analytics, or you can send data to Target, or Audience Manager. So any of these things, one or two of these things, ideally you'd have to pick one, at least one, right? But you sort of pick and choose, and it's configurable within the edge. So you can sort of see some benefits there where your data goes to the edge and then gets sent out to the Adobe solutions. And it has another superpower, which is that it can send that same data or augmented data, manipulated data to a third party, such as Facebook or Google, and a growing list of different extensions that our product teams are putting together to allow you to send your edge data, the same payload that you're sending to Target or Analytics or an augmented or manipulated payload, to some third party. And so that third party is, as I said, Facebook or Google, or it could be just your own data lake. You just want to send it directly to your data lake. That's a possibility as well. That's kind of it's an add-on SKU that using edge data collection by itself just comes out of the box. If you're licensed for these products, you can use this. Event forwarding is just an additional SKU for what it's worth. So the first tip, so having laid some groundwork, our first tip is if you're interested in edge data collection, you really want to know when is the right time to go. When should I migrate? Why should I migrate? What's in it for me? What's in it for my organization? So the answer to when is the right moment is we have kind of accumulated a set of use cases just through experience of when we think it's actually worth it to do it. And so we have a list of use cases I'm going to show here, and real-time segmentation is one of them. One of the things that the edge allows is when you send data to platform, you can combine, sync up that data with your customer or your CRM data and create segments that then can move back to the edge and be used to create audiences that are on your pages, or create audiences for behavior and activities, personalization activities on your pages. Right? So you've combined your behavioral data with your CRM data. You take those audiences, and those audiences can be on the edge and ready to be deployed in personalization activities on your pages. So that's the real-time segmentation and real-time personalization at the same time. Also, real-time trigger via AJO. AJO is Adobe Journey Optimizer, and what this allows for, and I had a session on this just yesterday, is a use case where you have something that happens on your site. Using yesterday's use case for a session I did, it's someone saved something to the cart, and this T-Mobile wanted to follow up with an email at that moment, and then 72 hours later with a follow-up email saying, here's exactly the thing that you put in your cart, and are you still interested, with a link back to the cart. So that's something that is allowed excuse me, through real-time triggers via AJO.
Kind of sensing a theme, real time.
Yes, real time. You can also solve for cookie deletion, and we're going to go into a little more detail on that in a moment. So what I mean by that is, if you're not aware, Safari right now deletes even first-party CNAME cookies after 7 days. If I had 7 fingers, I'd do it. 7 days. After 7 days, that cookie is dead. So if you have visitors that visit every 8 days, the device identifier that you're getting is different each of those 8 days if they're using a Safari browser. And so we have a solution that is really only enabled by the Web SDK to solve for that. From a future-proofing standpoint, this is really where all the development activity is going on the data collection side from Adobe. We are consolidating efforts around edge data collection and the way edge data collection solves for so many different use cases like the ones that I've described before. So it's sort of where all the attention is being focused right now. Semantic data structure. If you're familiar with analytics, you might be familiar with evars and props and numbered events. And the challenge with those can be that if you don't know what evar 1 is, you have to go look it up somewhere. And so wouldn't it be nicer if you could just use the same data structure throughout and not have to rely on numbered dimensions? And that's what WebSDK with Platform allows, is you can deploy this friendly name semantic data structure without having to number events streaming into Platform.
So descriptive, maybe?
Descriptive, thank you. Descriptive is a good way to talk about it. You can also offload third-party tags. So if you remember that the previous slide where we had what I called the superpower, which is event forwarding, if you've got some third-party tags on your site that are capable of being offloaded, and there are some caveats to sort of which third-party vendors can even accept server-side communication, but Facebook Conversion API, some of the Google Conversion APIs, you can communicate with AWS servers, things like that, but you can offload some of this data to the Adobe servers, the Adobe Edge servers. So that's pretty compelling. And as I mentioned, you can reduce the JavaScript load on your page, right? Since the WebSDK is consolidating all of those other libraries into a much smaller one, you've reduced the weight of JavaScript on your page, which is a net kind of performance increase. So what's the next tip?
Next tip. So if you've decided to move forward and you're going to undertake this large effort, if you're migrating or setting up, tip number 2 is to take out the garbage first. And as consultants, we kind of recommend this for anyone that's doing a large project. You don't want to just kind of do a lift and shift and move it over. Migration is a good opportunity to audit. It's a good opportunity to look at your business requirements, your SDR, see what still works, see what's still applicable. If it's not, get rid of it, move on, right? The other important key here is that BRDs and SDRs, that's kind of analytics terms, but this is going to be solution agnostic. And so you want to also add in things like where the data is eventually going, what destination it's going to. Add in your XDM keys, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But the real point here is that you're putting a lot of time and effort into this, and if you're moving code that's been built up over the years, all that custom code kind of bogging down your tag manager, you don't want to waste that time. You need that time for other important things. And so in order to use that wisely, get rid of all of that garbage. Get rid of everything that you don't need and just focus on the stuff that you do need. Yes, Jim. Is that a question? You raised your hand.
Can we also call this the eat your vegetables, do your chores, and then you can have ice cream tip?
Sure. Oh, he said, can we call this eat your vegetables, do your chores,
yes,
and then have your ice cream?
Yes.
Sure. I'm not a vegetable fan, so sure. Let's go with it. All right. Anyway, tip number 3.
Thank you. So this is new technology, edge data collection, and it is a fundamental shift in the way we collect data. So it's kind of important to go into this with eyes open that some things are going to change. So if your organization has particular use cases around what you're doing now, before you migrate, you want to make sure you're in touch with all of your use cases so that you can proactively determine whether there's any conflict there that you need to be aware of. So this slide is not exhaustive by any means. What we've tried to do is represent a couple examples here. Heartbeat video and activity map, if you were to try to implement tomorrow, would not be supported. These are things that are coming, and honestly, if you were to start your implementation tomorrow and it took you a month or 2 months to kind of get underway, you'd probably be in great shape because the product teams are working on this. But if you implemented tomorrow, they wouldn't be available to you. The hierarchy variable, I'm sorry to report, is not going to be supported. So anyone who's using the hierarchy variable, it's not coming back.
Please don't be using it. Please, please, please.
AMP pages are not ever going to be supported. Don't ask me why. If you have AMP pages, I'm sorry. There are some instances where some redirect pages are not supported, and this has to do with when you combine Web SDK with legacy solutions on different pages, there's some restrictions on redirect activities. But the screenshot here shows the roadmap status. This is a public-facing document. There's a link at the bottom of this slide. This is maintained by the product team that shows everything that is supported now and everything that is not. And really, there aren't that many things that aren't supported, but I still think it's really worth it to take the time to review that. And if you're working with professional services, Adobe Professional Services, then talk with your consultant and they can work with you to make sure all your use cases are aligned. Understand the language, Laura. What do we need to know about language?
So tip number 5, understand the language. Yeah, so the important thing is to know that this is not just kind of like rebranding analytics. This is a whole new kind of can of worms. And so you can't just kind of take the same terms that you've applied and say, hey, this works for Edge now. We showed this earlier, and you can see at the center of everything is Platform Edge Network. So that is the core of what you're going to be working with. And so it's important to understand what that is, but also the pieces underneath it. And so let's kind of do a little high level. So Edge. Edge is where you're sending the data. That's where everything happens. That's, like I said, the core of where things are going to be going. Web SDK, mobile, and server-side APIs that Jim mentioned, that's how you're getting that data there. So any data that's going to the Edge network needs to be kind of structured and formatted via the Web SDK. And then you have XDM, which is the data model. So that's it. It's a structure. It's the structure that you need with Web SDK and mobile SDK to get the data to the Experience Network Edge and for it to understand what to do with it, to then ship it off to all of those different products and third parties that we talked about. So kind of what we have so far is Edge, that's where your data is going, right? How it's getting there, Web SDK, mobile SDK, and what it needs to kind of look like when it gets there is XDM. So those are kind of high level. And even those three get confusing. You're like, which one am I talking about? Going a little deeper, though, is kind of the foundation of XDM and Edge, and that are schemas. So I think of schemas like a backpack, right? Everything that you're sending, everything that you're taking with you is going in your backpack. They will contain all of the data, represent all of the data that's being sent to the Edge. If you're going on a hike or something like that and you're packing your bag, you can't just toss a bunch of stuff in it and hope for the best. You can't say, hey, I'm just going to take everything. Let me just tag everything and then figure out what I need when I get there. That doesn't really work so well. And so think of your schema as a planned model of what you want to collect. One of the questions we get a lot is, what's the difference between XDM, the data model, and a schema? And so XDM applies to everybody. Everybody's going to be using XDM, no matter what company, how big, how small, what industry. The schema, that's going to be specific to you. That's going to be exactly what you want to send, what you want to use. Okay, so now you've got your backpack. And so let's talk about what we're putting in it. When you know what you're going to go do or what the situation is, you have an activity, right? And so the next level under schemas is a class. And so you can kind of think of that as activity. It's going to determine a lot of what you're putting in. There are 2 groupings in XDM for classes. We're going to talk about that in a second. But your class is going to determine, right, like what you're carrying with you. And in that class, there's going to be some groups and some subgroups. So in the shelter category, if you were going camping, you might have the subgroup of tent, and then in that, you're going to have several fields. These are the actual items that you're taking, right? So a tent pole, ground cover, rain fly, all of those are your actual fields. So your fields roll up into your subgroups and to your groups, and they all kind of fit into a class.
Where's the coffee maker?
That does not plug in the outdoors. I mean, unless you have a solar, do you have a solar battery pack? You could do that. And then the last piece is data types. And data types, they're kind of a finite list of what your fields can be. So, there are a limited number of materials that you can make things out of. And so think about like your tent pole is probably going to be metal or fiberglass or something like that. And your ground cover might be fabric, it might be recycled plastic, something like that, right? So that's kind of the keys of what's in a schema. Let's talk about an actual example. I'm not sure if that worked for anybody. So in the Edge world, there's two types of classes, which I mentioned. One is time series data, and that's everything that you're sending from web, from mobile, from your server-side APIs. It's all just things that happened in a time series. And then there's also records. And records is a little bit different. It's more behavioral data or attributes. So think of kind of product data or profile data. But for this example, we're going to look into website behavior. And for anything with website behavior, you're going to be using the pre-built XDM experience event. So your class is going to be XDM experience. And in that, you're going to have your field groups and your subfield groups, device, implementation details, web, and that would include like web interaction, web page details, all of those things that you currently are sending that tell you about the page they're on. So some of those fields are your unique identifier, your page name basically, your page type, that it's a page view, the metric for the page view. And so your unique identifier, your page name, that's going to be a string. Like I mentioned, there is not just web and time series data, but there's also record data. And so an example of that we can talk through quickly is, say, like a lead profile. So in a lead profile, this is data that you're sending in outside of Web SDK and Mobile SDK that you're porting in, attributes. You might have an individual's profile, a customer profile, right? And within that, you've got a field group of personal contact details. In that, you've got your mailing address, you've got your personal email, your mobile phone, and even within those, mailing address has subgroups of subfields of zip code and state, the actual email address, whether it's active or not, things like that. And again, in this example, the data type, again, is string, but you could also have, double, integer, a couple other options. Again, finite list. So this is the data that you would be sending into. This is everything that you want to put in your backpack and send to the Edge network. So now that you have all of that, now that you know what you want to do, where are you getting all that data?
From your data layer.
Yay.
So we have lately become fans of the idea of an event-driven data layer. And for anyone who's not familiar with that, a typical data layer is like a W3 standard that's been around forever. It's a simple JavaScript object that sits on your page. An event-driven data layer, by contrast, functions more like it collects events as it goes and it builds out your data layer. And the event-driven data layer, there's an Adobe version of an event data layer that is available as an extension in launch. And it is an event-driven data layer, but it also comes with some functions that allow you to, your developers just push data into the data layer. It makes development very straightforward. This is very good for single-page applications. For each event on a page, in a single-page app, or any event on a page, from page load to button click, becomes an event, and your developers just push that data into the data layer, and the extension, or the ACDL, the Adobe Client Data Layer, just reads the most recent values set into your data layer. So it functions a little differently than a normal data layer, but we find it really useful because it can solve for timing issues. One of the biggest headaches with a traditional data layer is you have your solutions, whether Adobe solutions or some other third-party solution, and you've got data that you're putting on the page. For large enterprises, this is a challenge. You've got data that's trying to be put on your page, and you've got tags that are trying to take that page, and it's always a little bit of a challenge. Can we take questions at the end? Thank you. It's always a little bit of a challenge to match up that data layer coming in with the harvesting of that data later to go out. So an event-driven data layer can tie the data updates to the event that you want to send. What we have here in this little bit of code, and I'm really sorry that I'm making you look at code. Eat your vegetables. This is an example of that kind of push activity that I mentioned, where in this case, the Adobe data layer already exists on the page, and we're just pushing data into the page. And at the very top, you can see the event is page loaded. And there's some event info that is useful when you're using launch. It's exposed in launch. It can be used for a rule. And the other data being passed, web page details, and the line item ID and server and the marketing tracking code, these are all just pushed into the data layer, and this triggers an event. What's additionally you can see in this particular screen capture is this is an XDM compliant data layer. What that means is it's aligned with some out-of-the-box field groups, like the ones that Laura described, that can be automatically mapped into analytics. Right? So if you're capturing data and going straight into AEP using a semantic data layer, you don't really care about analytics. But if you've got analytics, an existing analytics implementation, you somehow need to support your numbered variables still. So there are several field groups that if you populate your XDM payload with those values in this certain way, that mapping happens automatically. So that's very useful, and that's why that's why I use this in this example. But bottom line is that we really like the idea of an event-driven data layer generally. It's not a requirement for Web SDK or Edge adoption. It's just something that we are fans of.
Okay.
Mapping choices. So
Tip number 6.
yeah, how do you map?
Yeah, so I mentioned before that data has to be in a very specific structure when it gets to the edge. And so you have a couple of ways to make sure that it's in that structure. The first, that Jim kind of talked through already, is doing all of the mapping in your data layer. Having an XDM compliant data layer will kind of eliminate a lot of that extra mapping that you might have to do later. So less has to be done in launch or tags. But in most cases, if you're doing a migration, this is going to require you putting in a new data layer because it needs to match that formatting. If you already have that or you're doing a new implementation, this is the recommended route for sure. If you don't have an XDM compliant data layer already, you can do all of your mapping in tags, which you're probably already doing with your data layer and sending data to your solutions already. There's lots of data manipulation you can do in there. If you do it through certain methods, you can actually reduce all of your data elements down to almost one. But then you also have to keep track of all of that manipulation you're doing and tags and know, hey, this data element contains this, which came from this data layer element, and it's been changed this way. The other method that you set up in Edge is in data prep. And so data prep is a fun tool, that product has built that lets you do that manipulation on the server side, not in tags. And it can be specific to the product. There's 75 plus functions. You can also upload your JSON, and it teaches the Edge network what your data layer is. There's a nice little data preview too to see, hey, here's where everything's going to end up. There are some cons, like if you wanted to do multiple mappings, you would need multiple data streams and data prep, so some limitations. The biggest one that we're running into right now is that you can't copy from one sandbox to the next. So you set everything up, and you're in dev, and everything looks great, and then you go to move it to prod, and you have to kind of set it up again. But consulting, and someone on Jim's team, has come up with a great solution for that. So if you need help with that, we are here.
Yeah, there are some APIs that allow for that. It's just, it's not perfectly publicly exposed yet, so
But
we can help with that.
it will be there. It's coming. We're just working on getting things to you a little bit ahead of time. Okay, so that is how to get the data in, and that mostly applies to web pages. And that brings us to tip number 7, which is near and dear to my heart. Don't forget about your mobile implementation. Everybody kind of moves forward with Web SDK, and then they're like, we'll deal with mobile app later. It's a big pain. Nobody likes to make those updates. But Edge is mobile ready, and there's 2 main ways to send that data from your app into the Edge network. One, and we recommend this for new implementations, is to update to XDM code. Similar to updating your data layer to match XDM compliant, this would be going into your app and setting up all of your calls, all of your old track action calls to send event calls, and moving your context data to Edge XDM format. So that's option one. If you're doing a new implementation, definitely go that way. If you're migrating, we have another fun tool, and it's called the bridge extension. And this is recommended for migrations, at least initially. I would say when you find the time and you get the bandwidth, everybody should move to option one. But to get things moving, start with the bridge extension. And it basically takes those events, track state, track action, and it forwards them on to the Edge network without your app developers having to go in and change anything. It'll also take your context data and kind of forward it in a generic form with those events. Once it gets there, you'll have to use that data prep tool that we just talked about, kind of map it to the right place. But this puts less on the app developers to update right now, and so you can kind of plan that in, and you can get Edge and mobile set up faster, basically. Okay, so mobile, there's a lot of questions on mobile, and so I wanted to go over a couple that were a little bit deeper, frequently asked questions that we get. So because people typically set up Web SDK first, and then they're moving to their mobile app, one question is, what do I need to do to make updates for those mobile variables? How do I need to change my schema? And the answer is, we talked about field groups earlier. You don't have to create a new schema. You just have to add some new field groups. There are mobile lifecycle field groups that you can add in, anything that's mobile-specific actions or data that you're collecting. You can add those in, and you can still have one schema. The other one is regarding data streams. So when you're actually taking the data from Edge and sending it off to your solutions, do you need to create multiple of those? The answer to that one is not necessarily. You can use the same data stream across the board. There are some slight limitations, like if you're sending data in analytics to a mobile app report suite and to a web report suite, you can't do that. But for the most part, it keeps things clean. To have it in one data stream, you don't have to keep track of, okay, I've got 5 schemas and I've got 2 data streams, and here's the mix and match of them.
So is a data stream that configurable part of the Edge, and you sort of create a new one for each implementation?
For each product you could. So this is, once it gets to the Edge, in that diagram we showed earlier, the data stream is the data going off to the products. So in that, you can do a lot of manipulation, and you determine what data you want to send. It does not have to be the same to every product. There might be some things you want to send to Target, not analytics, vice versa. The last thing on mobile is extensions and planning ahead of time. So mobile app works a little bit differently, right? You have to have your builds ready. You have to have all of your dependencies built before you give the code to the developers. And so you want to make sure that you've got all of the extensions, all of the add-ons configured beforehand. Even if you're currently using the AP SDK, but you're not sending it to the Edge, there might be some updates you have to make. So you won't need the analytics extension, you will need the Edge network extension. So my recommendation, go in and determine what extensions you have, what you need beforehand, and check all of the versions. The old versions that are called like the ACP extensions, those are not the same as AEP. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit deep. But, so you might have to make some additional updates. These are kind of the foundational mobile extensions that you would probably see across the board even without any products. So you've got Edge Network, which is going to be new. You've got Lifecycle, you've got Assurance, which you should be definitely using. We'll talk about that more. Profile, and then you have Identity. Mobile identities are great.
So lucky.
Yes.
Lucky.
Your identity?
No, mobile is so lucky they get to cheat there with their identities.
I know, we do have an advantage with mobile app. It sticks with them as long as they've got the app installed.
Yes.
Web is a little bit not as friendly,
right,
which is why I prefer mobile.
Yeah, so yeah, the identity isn't an issue for mobile, but as you know, identities, or as you may know, identities when used on web have forever been captured, preserved for visitors by means of a cookie, different types of cookies. And as time goes by, the restrictions on cookies have increased. So there was a day, believe it or not, when Adobe relied on third-party cookies to preserve your visitor ID between visits. It's been a long time since we did anything like that. But as I mentioned earlier, Safari currently caps the lifetime of even C-named first-party cookies from the Adobe servers at 7 days. So this is sort of a new kind of restriction. So I'm not expecting to kind of read all these cookie types, but these are sort of the 4 ways that I think about cookies, right? We've got third-party cookies. We're not even going to talk about first-party C-name cookies, which is what Adobe is using. Also, just straight first-party cookies set by the Adobe server using a C-name, and first-party cookies set by your server. And the only thing that the Safari browsers will respect for longer than 7 days at this point is a cookie set by your website server, not by a C-name. And so they will leave that alone. That means that the Adobe solutions can't deploy a cookie on your pages that will live for longer than 7 days. So this is where first-party device ID comes in. The way this works is your domain, you set a cookie on your site that has a value that continues to exist for your visitor. And when the Adobe cookies get deleted, we use the value that you set, that you send into us, to manufacture a device identifier. And so no matter how many times our cookies get deleted, if your cookie is still there and you give us that same value, we can remanufacture the same device identifier that you had before. So that cookie deletion still happens, but yours is preserved.
Jim, can I just use like a customer ID? If I have a customer ID, can I use that?
Good question. So this solution is first-party device ID. It's not intended to be customer ID. Right? It's really supposed to be a device identifier. And the Adobe identifiers have always been that. That's always been sometimes a point of confusion, which is the common Adobe identifier that's used now is called an ECID. And that ECID is always a device identifier only. And even when you use the solution, we're using the cookie value that you set to remanufacture a device identifier. If you want to send in a kind of customer identifier, you can send that in alongside, but not in place of. So here's just a quick example of the current state. Pretty easy to see. March 21st, I come in. I've got ECID 1234. 7 days later, I'm expired. I come in on March 29th, I get a new ECID. April 6th, I come back, I get a new ECID.
Analytics looks like 3 unique visitors
Yes,
at this
and
point.
analytics is 3 different visitors.
I'm sure everybody's familiar with that trouble.
Yeah. So with FPID, you remain the same because we're using your cookie to remanufacture your device identifier.
1 unique visitor.
1 unique visitor.
That's awesome.
Yes. Okay. Now that we've done all the migration kind of thinking through, we've taken out the garbage, we've checked our assumptions, we've learned the language, maybe we've deployed an event-driven data layer. What's next? You're ready to migrate. You're on board. What should you migrate? You should migrate everything. What I mean by that is that because it's a new solution, there are some restrictions on the interoperability of the solutions right now. So right now, you can migrate, you can have one set of pages that have your legacy solutions on them, and you can have another set of pages. So I make an assumption here, we're talking about analytics and target. So when target is in the mix, this is where we have to pay attention to the order in which we migrate. When you have app measurement and AT.js on the page and visitor API, you can keep that. Those are the sort of legacy solutions. You can keep that together on a page, and then you can have a separate set of pages that have Web SDK powering those same solutions. That's great. That's fine. You can do that. What you can't do is mix and match on the same page. Say, well, I want to keep app measurement on the page, and I want to use WebSDK to run target on that same page. That doesn't work, right? So because of this restriction, actually, let me introduce another thing that feels like I'm going to contradict myself, but I'm really not. There are circumstances where you may want to have app measurement and AT.js on the same page, in which you're allowed to have WebSDK collecting data, say, into a different report suite. So the distinction being that you're not asking WebSDK to run target and app measurement to run analytics for the same report suite. So if you're familiar with A for T, analytics for target, and target is sending data to a report suite, and analytics is sending data to a report suite, so they need to be in sync. You can collect data to a different report suite using app measurement and have it be on this same page with the same legacy solutions.
This is really common and popular with larger organizations because it allows you to have both solutions on the page for a little while and make sure that your analytics in report suite A and your analytics via WebSDK in report suite B are aligning. It's a big code change, and especially larger organizations like to be very sure before making that switch.
Yeah, in fact, we've kind of baked this into our next slide, which is our kind of recommended process for if you're migrating solutions. One more thing I wanted to point out is that also a very common kind of dip your toe in the water with WebSDK strategy is to have your legacy solutions on the page and deploy the WebSDK, and you just configure the WebSDK to send data to platform. Right? There's no conflict then with target and analytics. You're just sending data to platform. Or you could also just send data to event forwarding to some third party. Maybe you want to send data to your data lake. So you can deploy WebSDK for that. Where we have to be very careful is when we're trying to coordinate between analytics and target on the same page. This is where we have to be careful. And so this leads us to our suggested migration path. So the assumption here is that you got the suite of legacy solutions. You've got analytics. You've got target. You've got visitor API. And
Audience manager.
Audience manager. Thank you. So the first thing you do is some development where you deploy WebSDK in your development environment, and if you're using tags, the tool formerly known as launch, you would ideally, and this is for folks that are familiar with the launch interface, you have a rule. That rule has certain logic that fires your analytics beacon based on a certain event on the page. You can just use that same rule, that same logic, to add an action for the WebSDK to send data to the edge. So at this point, you've got the same rule, you've got measurements, you've got target, and you're also sending data to the WebSDK. So this is what you're doing in development. So, and we recommend that you have companion report suites for the WebSDK in both development and production. So then what you would do is you would actually roll out in production using the kind of scenario that I outlined here. So you've got your legacy solutions on one page, and you've also got WebSDK, but the WebSDK is reporting data into a separate analytics report suite. At this point, once you've done that, you start to validate your data, because you can compare your data side by side. You can look at your analytics data collected into your global report suite, and you can look at your WebSDK data copied into a copy of your global report suite, and you can look at that, and this is how you determine that your solutions are in line. Once you've validated that all looks great, the next step is to bring target into the picture in your lower environment. You can't run WebSDK with target and AT.js with target on the same page. We don't have that capability to do that kind of side-by-side comparison. So what you end up having to do is deploy target in your lower environment. You pick a slew, or however many of you want, of representative activities, and you start testing those in your lower environment. Because the next thing you're going to do after you validate all the solutions in development is you're going to move straight into production. You're going to take out your app measurement library, and you're going to take out your AT.js library in development, And you're going to have, at that point, the full-on soup to nuts Web SDK does everything in development. And once you're satisfied with the way that's working, you're going to go live. And then you should always do a good post-production validation. That's just best practice. So that's the order that we think you should do things.
So what if that doesn't go according to plan?
It's not going, like, finding bugs and fixing things is just a natural part of migration. We all know that, right? So we've created this idea, steal this debug list. These are things that you can watch out for when you're migrating. Kind of while you're doing it, after you're doing it, when you see variances in your data, these are some things that you should look for. Share rule logic. I actually already mentioned that. When you build out, use the same logic for analytics and data collection that you're using for Web SDK. We want to kind of make the data collection process as kind of parallel as we can. The next thing is rule sequencing. This is a funny little configuration in the tags interface that causes the different actions in any given rule to wait for one action to finish before the next action starts. This can solve for some, I've seen this solve for some timing issues that people have. So if you can set that at your property level, you should do that. I think you can save yourself some headaches in certain situations. Apples versus oranges. We mentioned taking out the garbage first, eating your vegetables, cleaning up your implementation prior to migration. If you've made changes and then you migrate, you want to make sure that you're not comparing two things that obviously can't be compared. So obviously keep an eye on the changes that you've made.
Yeah, say you've re-implemented search because you're like, hey, this is a much better way to capture this. Make sure that you keep that in mind. There's going to be differences. Or if you went through and said, I'm going to get rid of all of the impression extra pixels that are firing off, you can't really expect your link pixels to measure up if you've gotten rid of a bunch of them. So just keep that in mind. Keep track of what you've changed.
Yeah. So other things to watch out for, unmigrated pages, data insertion API if you're familiar with that, mobile data. These are all things that you might be putting in your global report suite, and then you start to go look at big metrics like visits and page views, and you go, geez, these things don't match up. Well, the reason is you didn't migrate data insertion API, perhaps, or you haven't migrated mobile yet. So this is kind of a similar apples versus oranges comparison. You just want to make sure that the two things you're comparing are comparable. And these are some of the things that have been gotchas that we've uncovered the hard way. The other thing is CNAME. Here's a pro tip. The CNAME, if you're using a CNAME now for app measurement, you can use the very same CNAME for your edge data collection. That's great. And my recommendation is use a CNAME, and it's easy because if you're using one now, you should use the same one because you don't want to have cookie restrictions affecting your app measurement, your Web SDK calls that aren't affecting your app measurement calls. The other thing to watch out for is target data and analytics. Remember I said that the Web SDK can do all the things that the other libraries can do? That means that your target data is actually going to go into analytics as well, and that creates some volume in analytics. And so you have to be able to recognize some of this volume is our target volume, so not directly comparable. Link clicks versus page views. Not going to go into great detail here, but in app measurement, you choose when you send a call, whether it's a link click or a page view, and you do that in a certain way. There's an STL call, S.TL call versus an S.T call, for those that are familiar with those little function calls. There's an equivalent in Web SDK that has to do with the web page details object versus the web interaction object, and you just have to kind of be aware that those things are what distinguish in analytics a page view from a link track call. And it's a common oversight, I should say, to kind of miss that and then look at your data and go, geez, our page events way exceed our page views or vice versa. And the other thing is workspace for validation. I already mentioned kind of looking at things side by side. That's how we do that. We build a workspace, literally one workspace that has all of our key dimensions, and we look at them side by side. One, we've got our global data. The other, we've got our global copy report suite, dimension by dimension. We add our kind of key success events in there, and we look at that, and that's how we validate. So that leads us to, I know we said we were 10 tips, but
we couldn't help ourselves. We're sorry.
What
We actually could have added 5 more, but
happened?
one of the ones we wanted to make sure you guys took away was to let the AEP debugger and AEP assurance help. So you probably have seen the Experience Platform debugger. Looks like this. It can insert embed codes, replace embed codes when you're testing dev work in prod. But there are some edge-specific features that you should definitely take a look at. You can view the edge logs and the edge mappings. So because not everything is happening in the pixel, similar to like processing rules and Vista rules, you want to be able to see everything that's happening in one place, and the assurance debugger can do that. It's got a validation screen, and you can check everything that's going on there. The other great feature that is new is that it works with assurance. So a lot of people know assurance as mobile app. It's not just for mobile apps anymore. So you can take everything that happened in the AEP debugger and send it into assurance. Now, assurance can do a lot of the same things for mobile that you do on the web. You can view your event, your edge event. You can view the mappings. There's actually a validation editor where you can create validation scripts and run them. If you're not using Edge, you can still view context data in the assurance debugger. So great tools. Don't forget about them. And that kind of brings us to the end. So, too far. So just to recap really quickly, 10 essentials.
pick the right moment.
Make sure you take out the garbage.
Check your assumptions.
Understand the language.
Yes, and please use an event-driven data layer if you can.
Learn all the mapping choices that you have. Don't leave your mobile implementation behind.
Yes, and use FPID, the first-party device ID, to solve for Safari cookie deletion. And then when you're ready to migrate everything. And then steal our debug list.
And like I said,
provided.
go ahead.
Actually, I have a confession. I have an 11th tip that I thought of, but I don't think we have time now. So if you come down to the community pavilion, to the Adobe booth, I'll tell you 11th tip.
Speaking of, any follow-up questions? How'd you like that segment?
Come to the community pavilion, I'll tell you the 11th tip.
You can also enter to win a pair of iPods. So come down, chat with us. If you have any follow-up questions, we definitely did not leave a lot of time. So hang around or come talk to us down there. And if you like winning things, you can also go and take the survey about this session. Just so you know, Jim and I we just have a scale of 9 to 10. Ignore everything below 9. You either liked it or you absolutely loved it. But if you do the survey, then you can enter to win some iPads as well. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate you coming.
Thanks, everyone.